Hey, how's it going, you guys? Now you're probably wondering what kind of concoction it is this week that I'm cutting into. And well, this would be my Candied Pecan Tiramisu. And while this definitely isn't going to be considered a traditional or classic tiramisu recipe, it's something that I think is really tasty and I really wanted to share it with you guys. I've made it a few times, and in all honesty, it really is easy to make and it comes out tasting great. But as you can see for yourself, I don't really have to sell it that much, so let's get into the actual recipe. And as you can see with that kind of a fancy title screen, you can tell we're making something really decadent. So to start this off, we're going to first start by making our tiramisu cream. And now this cream is very simple, but it is a bit time consuming. It involves 9 large egg yolks. That's right, you're going to have to separate all of your egg yolks. And I do it by hand, just make sure you definitely have clean hands, obviously. But I feel like that's the quickest and fastest way for me. But it's okay if you get some of the white in there. Obviously, you don't want too much egg white in there, but like I said, it's okay if you get some in there, not the end of the world. And to that, we're going to add some granulated sugar, and we're going to create a double boiler. Now what this is, it's pretty basic. It's just a large pot with about an inch and a half of water underneath, and you really just don't want the water to be touching the bottom of the bowl, because the reason we're doing this is because we want to really slowly and gently heat up these egg yolks and sugar while whisking. And we're using the double boiler mainly because if we heated this up too quickly, we run the risk of scrambling our eggs, and that would cause a really lumpy texture. But instead, because we gently heated it while whisking it, it's actually going to double in size, and it's going to capture a lot of the air that we're whipping in. And as you saw, it came out really smooth, and you should be able to get those nice little ribbons when you pull the whisks out. That's how you'll know you're done, but really take your time with that process. And we're just going to put that off to the side and get to the other part of this cream, which is going to involve our mascarpone cheese, or well, however you want to say it. But we're going to whip this as smooth as possible, and you're going to want to really use room temperature mascarpone cheese just because it'll make your life way easier. And we're going to take it and we're going to slowly just dollop it into our egg mixture here and just fold it on in. Again, we beat a lot of air into our egg yolk mixture here, and so we don't want to just deflate it all and mix it in too aggressively, which is also again why you really want to make sure that your mascarpone cheese is nicely whipped up. And as you see here, I have a few lumps. It's not the end of the world. Remember, we are just going to be eating this, but really the reason there are lumps is because you get a little impatient while making this. The goal of this whole recipe is to be as patient as possible with everything, make sure everything is as smooth as possible. And so now we're going to actually whip up our heavy cream here, and yes, I'm going to be using the same bowl that I just whipped up our mascarpone cheese in, just to reduce on the dishes, because let's be honest, nobody wants to be doing that many dishes anyway. And you really only want to whip your heavy cream only to about soft peaks. And now the reason I say soft peaks is because if you go all the way to really stiff peaks, like a really firm whipped cream, it becomes really difficult to incorporate the other half of your cream mixture here, which is the egg yolks that you've already worked so hard keeping nice and light and fluffy. But I will say this is by far the hardest part, because I found through trial and many errors that determining how well your tiramisu finally sets up is determined by how well and how far you take your heavy whipping cream. If you whip it too much, it might be difficult to mix everything in and it might be lumpy, but it'll set up a lot more firm. If you don't whip it enough and you keep it really runny, your tiramisu might not set up all the way and it might be a little bit sloppy when you cut into it. But after we finish that, we're going to cover it in plastic and put it in the fridge while we make our candied pecans, which is my favorite part because these things taste absolutely out of this world amazing. And now these are really easy to make, and of course I'm going to have all the ingredients and the amounts listed down below. But a few things to note here: we are using a pinch of cayenne pepper. That's a bit of a little secret ingredient that I really love to add into these. It does a great job at contrasting the super sweetness of these toasted candied pecans. And speaking of pecans, once the mixture has just started boiling, you're going to want to add your raw pecans in. And the reason you want to use raw pecans and not the already pre-toasted kind is because this is going to actually toast them enough, because this sugar mixture here, once it starts to boil, it's already extremely hot and it'll actually toast them pretty quickly. Now you do want to be stirring this constantly, and you'll actually know when it's done when you start smelling the toasted pecan flavor. Oh, I think I just lost one there. But once it is done, you're going to want to spread it out onto a parchment lined sheet and let them cool and kind of solidify. Again, be very careful. This is very, very hot and it will burn you incredibly quickly. And so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure you spread them as thin as possible. We're not trying to make pecan bark here. We're just trying to let them cool down as quickly as possible. You're going to end up having to break them up anyway, because some of them will stick together as you see here, but that's okay. That just leads to different sizes. And again, you're dealing with melted sugar here, so it's incredibly hot. So don't even try to touch these for at least 10 minutes while they cool. And again, you're going to want to break them up by hand. I don't like to keep them all the same size. I like to kind of have big pieces, small pieces. But after I am done breaking them up, I'm going to just put them in a bag and put them in the fridge, because you do want to add these as cold as possible to the finished tiramisu. And speaking of the finished tiramisu, if you've made it this far into the video, please stay watching because we are almost done. Here we just brewed up about 4 cups of strong espresso, or you could use a really strong coffee as well. I'm going to add in a tiny bit of sugar as well as a bit of brown sugar just to add a little bit more of a depth of flavor. And I'm also going to add in some spiced rum just to give it a little bit more flavor and a little bit more of a kick. You do really taste it, and I think it does make this recipe even better. And now we're going to move on to dunking our ladyfingers. Oh, and by the way, I did put that mixture in the fridge just to cool it down all the way, because you do want to have everything as cold as possible for your final assembly. And now when you dunk your ladyfingers, you're just going to want to go right in and right out, turn it around, and the same thing, right in and right out. You want them to have a little bit of a crunch when you're setting it all up and assembling it, because remember, it will suck up a little bit more liquid while it's sitting in the actual tiramisu. And you do want them to ultimately be a little bit on the crunchier side versus the soggy side, just because you want that textural difference, and it really what makes the tiramisu special. You got that contrasting texture as well as flavors. And so with our first layer in, we're going to add about half of our tiramisu cream here, and you do just want to push it out to fill the edges. Don't try to like stir it up, because you do want to keep your ladyfingers nice and in place, and you don't want to pull them up or move them around too much. And so as you see right here, I'm more or less pushing it out to fill into the edges. And again, you want to make sure this layer is as even and as smooth as possible. Here I'm just going to pass it over with the spoon. Again, the smoother the better. And now that we have our second layer nice and smooth, we're going to go ahead and add more of our ladyfingers to make our second layer. And you're going to do this pretty much exactly the same as you did the first layer. Remember, just dunking the ladyfingers in and then pulling them right out real quick. That way you preserve some of their crunchiness. And actually comment down below, but do you rather have the top layer of cream to be a little bit thicker than the bottom layer of cream? Personally, I think the bottom layer of cream should be a little bit thicker than the top, or do you like them to be perfectly even? I don't know, it's kind of just a thought that I had, but yeah, let me know down in the comment section below. I'm kind of interested to see what you guys think. But now that we have all of our ladyfingers nicely moistened and stacked in there, we're going to add our second layer of cream, and you're gonna again want to just push it into the corners and make sure you smooth it out nicely. That way you don't mess up any of the ladyfingers. And once you're done getting it nice and smooth, you're going to want to cover it with plastic and put it in the fridge for at least 4 hours. I like to do it overnight. That way you let the cream solidify a little bit. Oh, and just don't let plastic wrap actually touch the cream. Otherwise, after it's done solidifying, it'll stick to the plastic wrap. And as you peel it off, it'll kind of pull some with it, and it won't leave a great presentation. And another thing you definitely shouldn't do is you don't want to sprinkle on the cocoa powder just yet. We're actually going to save that until right when we're about to serve it. Otherwise, the cocoa powder will draw moisture out of the cream, and it'll just turn into one big muddy mess. And now, speaking of toppings, you can always go with just the traditional cocoa powder, but I think that's kind of boring if you ask me. So I'm actually going to spice it up a little bit. I'm going to toss in some chopped up chocolate as well as those candied pecans that we made earlier. And in all honesty, they add a great texture, awesome flavor. But in the end, you really want to make it your own. Put flavors that you enjoy on top, whatever that may be. Maybe you want to use walnuts, really, you can do whatever you want. Don't let tradition stand in the way of you making something that you really love to eat, or that your loved ones really love to eat. Because when you go through the process of making something like this, you really want to be able to share it with the people you care about around you. And I feel that should definitely be one of the reasons for making something this great. But now that it comes time to actually serving this thing, we're going to pull it out of our fridge. Again, we haven't put anything on yet until we're about to serve it. Otherwise, it could just turn into a big muddy mess on top. And again, don't let tradition stand in the way of innovation. You can do whatever you want to decorate this thing up. And in the past, I've actually used stencils to dust in some pictures with the cocoa powder. But for this time, I'm just going to dust on the cocoa powder in a nice, thick, even layer. And look at that, if you've gotten tired of me dusting on this cocoa powder, here's it from another angle. And now it's time for us to just sprinkle on the chopped up chocolate and the chopped up candied pecans. And I do chop up the chocolate a little bit rough just because I think it adds a great texture and it adds a really cool look to it. Makes it look really homemade. And now that I've absolutely smothered this thing in a thick layer of chocolate and candied pecans, because I really do love them, I'm going to cut into this thing and finally serve it. And you can actually make the tiramisu ahead of time by about 3 days if you want to just store it in the fridge. Obviously, just don't put any of the toppings on it. But anyway, guys, this one came out amazing, tasted great, looked even greater. I really suggest you give this one a try. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And without further ado, it's time to cut into this thing and give it a try. And like I said earlier, of course, it tastes amazing. So again, please just like, comment, subscribe, follow me on Instagram for a behind the scenes look at the recipe creation process. And until next time, peace.